Thanks, Matt, for the reading. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Abrahm. I'm one of the pastors of the church, and it's my great privilege to bring today's message to you from Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 to 30 in our series, Faith in a Divided World. We do live in a divided world, politically divided. People have very different worldviews and perspectives, and as Christians, we're often faced with authorities or influences in our lives that share different values to us. And of course, that puts a lot of pressure and it makes it difficult for us to know how we're meant to live, particularly if we face an authority that doesn't align with us and may ask things of us that compromise our values and beliefs as Christians. And so the book of Daniel helps us navigate this, living out our faith in this divided world. Today's topic, Only God Knows, talking about mystery. You might have heard someone say this phrase before, only God knows. Often people say this when they're facing something that they don't know the answer to. Perhaps it's an expression of frustration. You know, you hear, only God knows why he would do that. Only God knows why they would say that. You know, no one knows. It's this sort of expression of frustration when we face a mystery we can't answer. And I've often asked this, said only God knows the answer to certain things, particular mysteries that really frustrate me, like Stonehenge. You know, what is this? No one knows. People have written songs about this. You know, what's the meaning of these rocks? Okay, and how do they stack these big rocks up without modern technology? No one knows. It's a mystery. Only God knows. I have to wait to find out. It's really annoying. Or the big, massive heads at Christmas Island. There's like over 800 of these things buried in the ground. People have dug them up. Who made these massive heads and who put them there and why? And how did they get them there? It's probably some sort of joke, some sort of prank that someone played on us and made them thousands of years ago and thought, this is going to be so funny. We'll make these massive heads, we'll bury them. People are going to go nuts. And they have gone nuts. All right? There's a group of scientists trying to figure out how they managed to move them without modern technology. They're spending millions of dollars in this research trying to figure out how they move these big heads around. I have no doubt this is an absolute waste of time. You know, trying to figure this out. But I actually donate to this cause because I want to know the answer, right? How do they move these things? Is this how they did it? I don't know. Someone is laughing in their grave. Who knows the answer to this mystery? Only God knows. The Bermuda Triangle, I saw a documentary on it. It is kind of weird. Where all the ships and planes go? Why this particular area? I don't know. I want to know. It's a mystery, okay? And hopefully one day I'll find out. And of course, this one, Loch Ness. We all know it's not true, but in my heart, I want it to be. Don't you? Don't you kind of hope that one day maybe they'll find out there really is a dinosaur in Scotland, wherever it is, in this lake? But we know it's not true. But the mystery of maybe there's something out there, of course. And then we have this question of why we dream. I've asked this question: why do we dream the weird things that we dream? There's lots of explanations, our brain tidying things up, and it's just kind of this random collection of our experiences coming together. But of course, in this culture, in this context, in this point in history, it was understood that dreams were a way for God to communicate, and particularly to kings, that dreams God would communicate through dreams to kings. I've broken this story up today into 4 different sections. You can see in your bulletin that's there with the verses as well. An unreasonable request, verses 1 to 11. And then the stalling for time with Daniel in verses 12 to 16. Then a miracle occurs with the revelation in verses 17 to 24. And then a shocking revelation at the end, verses 25 to 30, which we'll tell you what that is later. You've probably had people make unreasonable requests of you before. I used to work in before and after care, and a kid once made this request. They'd been really naughty that day, and they said, Abram, even though I've been really naughty today, could you tell my parents I've been good so I get a reward? That's an unreasonable request. I said, only if you split the reward with me 50-50 will I tell your parents you've been good. And so we made that deal, and I got half the ice cream. So it was great. But that's an unreasonable request. I'm not going to do that for that kid. That's not right. Of course, sometimes in our workplaces, our environments, unreasonable requests are made of us. It's very difficult, isn't it, to navigate what we do when we face this, and particularly when that's an authority figure. We've got a really unreasonable request here from King Nebuchadnezzar. He's obviously really stressed out by this dream. He was tormented by it. He wanted to know what it meant. And he's made this unrealistic request this unreasonable request to his wise men. He probably knows the details of the dream, but I'm not going to tell you. You have to tell me what I dreamed and the interpretation. And they're obviously really shocked by this. That's unreasonable. You can't ask that of us. No one can do that. But there's a bit of a hint here as to why Nebuchadnezzar's feeling this way. These guys, these advisors, we learn about it in the book of Daniel. They're absolute schemers. They scheme again and again. And they scheme to try and kill Daniel and all his friends because Daniel gets more respect and more power because he's more trustworthy, and they get jealous. And so they scheme to try and get him killed. That's what happens in the very next chapter. So these guys were schemers. And you can see it in this expression. It's a bit of an idiom, to say, you guys have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. It's like till the cows go home, forever. You guys have made this agreement to speak lies to me. So I don't trust you. So obviously at some point, these Chaldeans, these advisors, they've used the king's dream and they've offered an interpretation that seemed to suit their political interests and probably wasn't really the truth. See, at that time, the advisors, their religion in Babylon, they actually had a whole system for interpreting dreams. There was books and literature on it. I think Sam mentioned it last week as well. So there was a way to go about interpreting people's dreams. And these advisors, being corrupt, would have used it to their advantage. So he's saying, nope, if you're really speaking on behalf of the gods and you say you can interpret their dreams, you should be able to tell me my dream as well. Well, they go, well, there's not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand. No great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with the flesh. So you see their frustration, okay? Now, this is really interesting setup by the writer. It's a really fascinating theological point being made here, isn't there? You can kind of see where it's heading, all right? No one but the gods can do this. So what are they saying about their view of God or the gods? Well, they're saying the gods are the ones who offer the dream, they offer the mystery, they torment us, but they don't offer the interpretation. That's up to us. Okay, the gods give the dream, but they don't give the interpretation. They're not involved in our affairs. But the writer is saying, we're going to show you a different understanding of God, the God of Israel. He's a God who actually does get involved in human affairs. He gives the dream and he gives the interpretation. He's involved in our lives. So he's making a theological point that our God is different. Our God's different to these pagan gods. He's actually going to get involved. He gets involved with our lives. And this not only points to the difference between the God of Yahweh and the pagan gods, but even further, it points further to the New Testament, to the gospel. It talks about Jesus becoming flesh. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we've seen his glory. Glories of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So what's God like? Well, he's a God that gets involved in our lives. He gives the dream and the interpretation. He's the God who becomes flesh and dwells with human beings. So he gets involved in our lives and our problems. If you read and learn about Jesus, you read and learn about God, God in the flesh. Jesus walked among human beings and lived with us. He gets involved in our lives. Mystery revealed from the ages. Then we get this stalling for time, of course, because Daniel catches wind of what's going to happen. All the wise men are going to be killed. Now, we might read this story and think, well, that doesn't happen today anymore, but this really does happen today. We're lucky here in Australia. We don't live in a dictatorship. It's a slightly different experience for us. We have some legal rights. We can make a stand for ourselves and we can pursue some legal means to get justice. But in many countries around the world, when the dictator, when the leader says, I don't trust my advisors anymore, I'm going to put them all to death, that can happen. And it still happens in particular countries today. And that's what they were facing. Now, Daniel has an interesting response. He replies with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard. who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. And he declares to Arioch, why is the decree of the king so urgent? So this is interesting because Daniel seems to be able to slow things down a bit here. I mean, typically, Arioch would just be like, well, I'm going to obey the king's order. I'm just going to go out and put these guys to death. But Daniel's able to actually slow down the process. And we see that chapter 1, that Daniel actually does have a lot of influence. And he gets increasing influence as he goes along. He's a man of character, he's trustworthy, and he actually has wisdom, and he responds prudently. So he's able to slow down the process. You can see that King Nebuchadnezzar, even though he's a bit frustrated and he's putting together all these wise men, ultimately he does want people that he can trust. He does want people that he can trust and rely on. Daniel went in and he requests a time with the king to show the interpretation to the king. But what's interesting about this is that Daniel doesn't know the interpretation yet. He doesn't know. He's just kind of putting his neck out there and going, well, I've got to do something. And so, I'll appoint a time and I'll tell you the interpretation. But he hasn't received it yet. He then goes to his friends and goes, we've got to seek mercy from God to get this interpretation, or we're all going to die. So it's very different. We shouldn't picture Daniel as a very stoic, calm, collected guy going, oh, this is no big deal. I'll set a time, I'll go talk to my mates, we'll get the answer, and then I'll deal with things. The real scenario here is that this is life or death. And I think there would have been a bit of anxiety in Daniel about this whole situation. And so he goes forward and sets a time to do that. He intervenes on behalf of all the other wise men to try to save them as well as him and his friends. Now, being trustworthy, it does pay off in the long run. Of course, we're not living in a dictatorship, but often we do face experiences as Christians where our authority puts a bit of pressure on us, asks us to do things that we really don't feel comfortable with. I've had this in my own life, my own experiences. I'm sure you have as well, and I'm sure there are things happening for you, even maybe right now, where you're sometimes feeling like you have to compromise. I did used to work as a cleaner, and I did some window cleaning as well. And sometimes there were some tensions there as I did that job where those above me, the boss would say, well, we want things to happen really quickly. Don't worry about cleaning those things, because it doesn't really matter. Just move on, And I always felt a bit conflicted with that, something very small and very simple. And so I did actually try to go through and do what I felt I needed to do. Sometimes that meant I took longer, and I copped a little bit of flack for that. But over time, I actually built a solid relationship with my employer, and he came to have a lot of trust and confidence in me. In fact, I supplied him with most of his employees. I was at the Bible college at the time, and he always needed new people. So he'd come to me and go, do you have anyone else you can suggest to come and fill in? And I'd go back and find people and get them to come along. At the end of that period, he said to me, ever since I've been going to you for all these guys, I've had no problems with my workers. It's the first time in my entire business that I've had no issues. Phew, that's lucky, because they're all Christians, could have given a really bad reputation. But he said, I've had no issues, apart from that one French guy you got. Nothing against the French. But that's what he said. But everyone else was really, really good. And so we were trustworthy. So there's issues and there's tensions, of course, as we try and interact with our authority. But the truth is, trustworthiness, integrity, character, these are the Christian's secret weapon. I mean, this is really all we have to offer in these situations. Because the difference is going to be whether people respond to authority without integrity or whether they respond to authority with integrity. These are going to be the differences. And as God's people, we're called to respond with integrity, with honesty, with trustworthiness. Of course, what's interesting about this story is that both the Jewish exiles and the enchanters are in the firing line. The question is who's got integrity? Who's trustworthy? Who's going to be able to stand their ground? As Christians, no matter what the consequences, we've got to have integrity. We've got to be trustworthy. But it pays off in the long run, either through God vindicating us or through the people around us realising, hey, these people are the real deal. We can actually trust them. And so we trust them, we're going to listen to them. So then we get this miracle occurring. What's the miracle? Well, God intervenes. He gives the interpretation. of the dream. And he gives the details of the dream. Daniel makes it really clear it wasn't because he was wise that he's really smart. He is wise and he is smart, but that's not how he got the answer to this dream. God intervened. It was a mercy from God. Now, Daniel does something first. He goes to his house and he makes the matter known to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He goes and tells them. And they say, well, we've got to seek mercy from God. Mercy that God would tell us the answer. So what's he doing here? He's gone straight to his life group. Really stressed out, got a problem. We've got to do this together, all right? That's what he's done, all right? And they've prayed to God together. I mean, how good is it to have friends and people that we can get together with to help us in difficult situations? I've got a financial situation. I've got no idea what to do. I need help. Can we please pray about it together? Can we seek mercy from God? I've got a health problem. I've got no idea what to do. Can we please pray about it and ask for mercy from God? Okay, so it's not Daniel against the world. Daniel goes to his friends and their support. And of course, we've got to do the same thing as well as followers of Jesus, supporting each other, helping each other, because we will face really difficult, complicated problems. And we need to think through them together, and we need to approach God together. And that's what happens here. And God answers. He reveals the mystery. And then Daniel begins to praise God. He gives thanks to God because God's shown mercy by revealing the truth. It's mercy that God would speak into our lives. It's mercy that he would send Jesus and so that we could know him. It's something we don't deserve. It's mercy. And what does he say about God? He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and he sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. Now, this is another interesting theological point that Daniel's making, because he's saying God sets up all kings and removes all kings. Now, that's interesting because Daniel's come from Israel, and the tendency there at the time was to think, well, we're the special ones, and God doesn't really care about all the other people out there and all the other kings. But God had always said, Israel, if you disobey me, I'm going to judge you. I'm going to use other nations to do it. So from some of their perspective, it's like, what's God doing? Is Israel defeated? They've been defeated by another nation. What's going on? But of course, God's just sitting there going, no, I'm in control. This is all part of my plan. This is what I'm doing. I set up kings. I set up authorities. Scott Morrison said when he won the election, it was a miracle that I won the election. It was a miracle of God. But we have to say as well, we say, yes, it was a miracle. And if Bill Shorten had have won, it also would have been a miracle, because it would have been God who sets up authority, who chooses who's going to be in power, who's not going to be in power, and he uses those people to do his plan, to do his work. So here we've got Daniel and all these exiles in Babylon facing a pagan king, and God is the one who's put Nebuchadnezzar there, and God is speaking to Nebuchadnezzar. It's all part of what God is doing. To you, O God of my fathers, I gave thanks and praise. You've given me wisdom and might. You've made known to me what I asked for, what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. So he really thankful to God that God has stepped into his situation. And look, we might not be like Daniel in that we get special dreams and special interpretations, but as followers of God, we do have wisdom to impart to the world. Wisdom has been revealed. Mystery from the ages talks about in the New Testament. The mystery that's been revealed is Christ, that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's died on the cross for our sins, that by putting our faith and trust in him, we don't have to have the burden of the law, but we can be forgiven and made right with God. This is mystery and wisdom and truth revealed to us as human beings. And we've got to offer that to others. Daniel offers his insight and wisdom to those around us, to those around him. He offers it to the king. We have truth and wisdom to offer the world that's given to us by God. And that's a contribution that we need to make. Whether it's the wisdom of knowing what's right and wrong, of having integrity, of knowing how to navigate through different problems in life, or whether it's the wisdom of sharing specifically about who God is, who Jesus is, what the gospel is. This is mercy that God has shown us by revealing us this truth. God's shown us mercy. You see, if God didn't speak into our lives, if he didn't reveal himself to us, then we wouldn't know what we know. So when we look on Facebook and someone's commenting on a particular issue and they're expressing a viewpoint that's the opposite to us, and it's so frustrating that this person would think this way. I have to think, well, actually, if God didn't work in my life, if he didn't reveal his truth to me, I would think differently. I would have a different worldview. I would have a different set of values. You see, you'd think Daniel would be really angry against Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar's wiped out his whole hometown. Nebuchadnezzar was an evil man. He should hate Nebuchadnezzar. Yet Daniel takes up his role of sharing God's truth with this man, Nebuchadnezzar. We have to do the same thing. So what's the shocking revelation? Well, amongst the exiles of Judah, a man who will make known to the king the interpretation, Arioch brings him in. The shocking revelation is that you'd think that the dream and the interpretation would be some kind of judgment against Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, imagine in Daniel's heart, he'd probably want that, right? Wouldn't you want that as well? This is great. Hopefully what the interpretation of the dream is going to be is that Nebuchadnezzar is judged, he's going to be thrown down, Israel's going to be restored. That's what's going to happen, right? That's going to be the good story. But that's not what happens. The interpretation is just for King Nebuchadnezzar to know what's going to happen in the future, just to be able to see what's going to happen, and that's it. So here we have God reaching out to a pagan king. He's speaking to this pagan king. He's not an Israelite king, he's a pagan king, and he's reaching out to him. This would be really difficult for the average Israelite to read at that point in history. But what's going on? Why is God like this? Why is God reaching out to all these other people? See, this is actually a fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant. Remember the Abrahamic covenant? When it all started, when God put Abraham aside, he said, I'm going to bless you so that you can bless the nations. And if you don't do that, if you fail to be a blessing to the nations, I'll bless the nations anyway. I'll do it without you. So it's a very different understanding of God and a challenge to them. What's happening here? Well, Nebuchadnezzar is being absolutely blessed by God. And he's using the Jewish people to do so, speaking through Daniel to reach this pagan king. And what happens down the track? Well, of course, Nebuchadnezzar turns to God, and we'll look at that a bit later, and so reaches out to other people. So God is reaching out to this pagan king. Daniel says, as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. Daniel makes it really clear. So it's not because I'm really smart, but because God gave me the interpretation, and I'm passing it on to you, and that's all I can really do. So our big picture idea for this whole passage is that God is the revealer and source of truth and wisdom. This is this big idea running through this passage. God is the revealer of truth and wisdom. He's the kind of God who gets involved in our lives, and he tells us who he is. So what do we need to change in our hearts and our attitudes as a result of this big truth? Here's a couple of things. Firstly, we should have an attitude of humility regarding what we know. If God's the reason why we know what we know, if he's the one who gives us wisdom and gifts and ability, you read in chapter 1 that Daniel and his friends are 10 times better than all the other wise men. If you're at your work and you're 10 times better than all your colleagues and you're really frustrated, why am I so much better than them? Well, we should have an attitude of humility. If I'm better than them, it's because God gave me the knowledge and wisdom and gifts. He's the source of all truth. And Daniel humbly gives all glory to God, and so should we. And so that should impact our perception when we look at those who oppress us, who have a different viewpoint, who seem ignorant or frustrating. Well, if I didn't have God reveal truth to me, what would my perspective be? What would my worldview and values be? Wouldn't they be different to what I currently hold? Wow, God's shown me mercy, so I really need to be humble in how I speak to others. A willingness to intervene with the truth. So we see that the difference between Israel's God and the pagan gods, that God gives the dream and the interpretation. He's involved in our affairs. He sends Jesus in the flesh, and Jesus is involved in our lives and walks among us. So we've got to be willing to intervene with the truth and be a part of people's lives. Sam's shared the story before about how he was visiting Street Family Cafe, which is a ministry we are involved in, and he was having dinner with someone. He sat down at the table, he had dinner with one of the guys there, and he asked him, "Why do you come here and not one of the other places where you can get food? Why do you come here?" The guy said, "Oh, well, it's different here. You guys sit down and you eat with us, whereas everywhere else I just get food." You see the difference? A very subtle difference. But what's he really saying is that, well, here you offer not just food, but relationship. You intervene, you sit down with me and you talk to me. And this is the difference that God demonstrates. God is different. He sits down with us. He's involved in our lives. And we are also meant to be involved in other people's lives, intervening and sharing truth. A reliance on others around us to cope with the difficulties of our lives. Again, we saw Daniel went to his life group. And as well, if God is the revealer and source of truth and wisdom, chances are he hasn't given all of it to any one individual, but he might have spread it out amongst us. And so we need each other. We need to speak to each other, bring problems to each other, and listen to each other as we share and help each other navigate these difficult, complex situations. And finally, a generous heart towards those who haven't heard the gospel, even those who mistreat us. Daniel had a very generous heart towards Nebuchadnezzar. He serves him, he tries to do the best by him in his position, and he builds a strong relationship with him. We need to have a generous heart to those who haven't heard God's truth or don't know God's truth, and even those who have mistreated us or made things difficult to us. This is a great example from Daniel. If God is the source of all wisdom and truth, he's shown us mercy, well, we should have a generous heart and attitude to those who haven't heard it. Jesus says in Matthew 5:16, he says that we're the salt of the earth, the light of the world. He says, in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. And this is something that we all have to do, live in such a way and speak in such a way that people see how we live and have the opportunity to give glory to God in the long run, because they can trust us, and hopefully we have an opportunity to share God's truth with them. Let's come before God in prayer, and then we'll have some questions.